Okay, welcome all to book club chit chat about the Invention of Morel, Adolfo Villa Casares. We have 4 lovely guests, or I guess 3. You all know Max, lovely co-instructor. But I was hoping you guys could just introduce yourself briefly, share your name, your department, really anything you want to share, but also answering, I think, a really pertinent question to this book. Where do you stand on immortality? Are you for it? Are you against it? If you were offered a chance to be immortal, would you take it? Do you feel it's achievable? Or do you think it's just not even relevant to this book at all? If that's a possible answer. We can start with Marcos, since you're to my right.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Marcos. I'm a PhD student in rhetoric. Now, where I stand on immortality, I think, yes, it's possible, and I'm against it. That's my position. And I also would say, I don't think if I were offered it and had the opportunity to reject it, I think I would say no, but I don't think we have that opportunity. And I think that's part of the problem in the book that we have to kind of confront.
Mm-hmm.
I'll popcorn over to Christian.
Hey y'all, how you doing? My name is Christian Montas Reyes. You can call me Chris for short. Pronouns are they, he. The PhD student in complete. Trying to think. Immortality. I feel it is possible. Eventually, it'll be possible. Maybe ? But I don't think I'm down. Like, I ain't trying to live forever. And then, yeah, I don't know. I don't know how I feel about it. I don't think I'm down to see like thousands and thousands of years of more of what's going on.
Thanks.
And then I'll go to Matt.
Hello, everyone. I'm Matt. I'm a PhD student in Comp Lit. I already forgot what else I was supposed to say. Was that it? Anything else about myself?
Yeah.
Okay. And then about immortality, where I stand on it. I'm going to overcomplicate this question by asking, like, what form of immortality, right? I feel like there's different kinds that emerge, you know, even within this novel. One might be the sort of like journal he keeps and communicates to us with. But then the other form, which I think is the one we're asked to think about, is the recording itself. And that's, I don't know, that seems more like a hellish, repetitive existence to me. But yeah, it's yeah, I'll stop there.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Max, do you want to go next?
Oh man, I thought I got out of the immortality question because I don't have anything insightful on hand, but you all should know me, but I'm Max, your instructor, Comp Lit grad student, and this was my first time reading the book, and I just would have to echo what everyone else has already said. I'm not down with immortality, especially just immortality in general without any sort of specifications or qualifications. But it's a pretty scary notion in this book. So yeah, I'm sort of freaked out by it at present.
Thanks, Max. I guess me. Hi, I'm Gladys. I'm also your instructor for this course. Wow, I was hoping at least one of us would be for it, but no, I also do not want to be immortal. I think I have this idea that life is sort of only worth living because there's an end. And yeah, I don't know what it would look like. And also, I think especially the class I'm taking, there's so much about embodiment and like your actual body being so much of the way that you experience the world and so connected to who you are as a person. And like, I don't know, it took me a really long time to figure out whether or not you could even touch the bodies because he spends so much time avoiding them. And I guess you can, but I don't know. I think most people's vision of immortality is sort of like uploading your consciousness to some machine or something like that. And I definitely don't want that. Also, like, I would prefer to be preserved if I was going to be at like 22 and I'm already past that. So no to immortality. Great, thank you so much. I thought we could start with a really brief summary of the book, if anybody wants to do that, just for those who didn't read it, which is totally fine. We still support you.
Well, I can give like I can hazard a summary, and then you guys can add to it, because I'm probably gonna miss some stuff.
Okay.
Because the way I read it, and this is also about my my affective relationship to the book. I read the first 25 pages about this guy who seems to be on the run from the law, who escaped to some random deserted island that has some kind of mysterious disease associated with it, totally uninhabited, totally empty, and then kind of starts documenting his experience being on the island, which then I guess he kind of starts hearing these ghost things, recordings, but also sometimes seeing people around. He's afraid that it's the police or police sending people to come get him. But then the second part of the book, from page 25 to 100 or whatever, I read all in one sitting, because it becomes this almost psychological thriller, almost mystery detective genre, in which we learn more about these ghost-like apparitions that don't seem to, that he's kind of avoiding, but he's also kind of trying to interact with them. And then we follow basically his relationship to all these different ghosts. In particular, this one, Faustine, who he becomes kind of enamored with. And this like guy she's always with, Morel, who kind of hates and is trying to figure out how to insert himself into Faustine's life. But we kind of progressively learn more and more about this like very weird relationship, that these apparitions don't seem to see him. They seem to interact with themselves, but not with the broader world. And then eventually we get to this point where there's like crescendo in the book where we learn, oh my God, actually this guy Morel is an inventor who has invented a machine to copy the likenesses, our sensory perception of individuals, and then replay them. And he's invented this and installed it on this island. And so that's what our protagonist is seeing, is the replaying and replaying of this island visit that Morel had coordinated with his friends. And then it ultimately comes out that the disease of the island is that when you do this recording process on some living thing, it captures the likeness perfectly, but the original object deteriorates and eventually dies. So all the people the assumption is all the people who were recorded on the island die. And so at the very end, our protagonist decides to record himself and kind of insert himself perfectly into the choreographed phantasmical dance of these different apparitions in order to like install his own eternity there. And then presumably he also died. Then we're left with this diary that is the book, and these questions that we have to discuss.
Thank you, Marcos. I don't really think you left anything out. I feel like that was a great summary of the book. I just wanted to share, I guess, why this was included in the syllabus. Well, I think I'm just really interested in the plot. I'm really interested in thinking about like co-creating with the dead and technology as a form of either preservation or rearticulation. This is something that we talked about on Tuesday. The question of whether or not the actual soul is still attached, whether we see this as a kind of immortality, or whether actually like they're totally different beings, but there are still ways in which the original actor has a kind of agency that comes about through this like collaboration with a different subject. So when the final product of the two of them mingle together, there's something new that comes about, and that new creation being a collaboration between sort of living and the dead, that creates agency. But so these are all just sort of my particular interests in it.
Mhm. And I had not thought about the co-creating aspect of it, because it goes to what Matt's point was at the beginning with immortality, that like, yes, the recording is a kind of immortality, but there are also other forms of immortality in like the book that is written by a dead person or a person who is dead now. And in us discussing the book, we're also kind of co-creating with the dead and re-engaging them, and also kind of putting them on paper somehow when we write our own essays or whatever.
Yeah, the afterlife, we're creating the afterlives of the book. That's in our course description, in case anybody was wondering what it meant to create these afterlives. But also because I just think that it's such a good exercise in reading, because it's so full of details that just like finally click at a certain moment. Everything makes sense in the end. So it's a really good reread as well, not just the first time around, but also for the second. Matt, I feel like you want to say something.
I'm really interested in just what you all were talking about right now. So particularly the way in which you started relating it back to the idea of the book itself, or books in general, and how we interact and dialogue with them, or believe ourselves to be in dialogue with them. And in terms of how the protagonist, I forgot, does he have a name? No name? Right?
No, he has no name.
The protagonist decides to insert himself into this recording as if he were participating in some sort of dialogue and living out his fantasy of having a real relationship with this woman. Yeah, it's just so interesting or strange, that idea of like superimposing oneself into this thing that is a document or a recording of something, and believing, or like deluding yourself into believing that you are like actually communicating with, or having some sort of meaningful relationship with the thing that actually maybe doesn't even know you're there, right?
But does it have agency outside of it knowing that you're there? I mean, I think that like the book kind of speaks to us in a certain way, that maybe not in the like typical sense of you knowing that you're speaking to me, but it still speaks to us.
Yeah, I don't feel deluded. I definitely think there's a way in which we communicate. But I think, just to bring it back to our reading on Tuesday, it's less like you're actually communicating with the person, and more like their labor still has effect. It's still able to create a kind of effect. And that being a way of marking existence. So it's not really the same as being like, oh, I'm definitely talking to Adolfo Bioy Casares, or to like, you know, any of the characters, but just thinking of existence as effect. I don't know if you wanted to say something, but I also want to make sure that I asked one of the questions, which was mostly to Max, Cristian, and Marcos, but also Matt, if you happen to remember, because I know there's some things that it felt like I was reading anew. Like when you first started reading it, what you thought was going to happen, and if at any point that idea becomes complicated, and how you have to like shift your ideas across the book. Or you can respond to anything else.
I was tempted to say more about what we were talking
about.
Yeah,
say it. Say it.
And then we'll come back if that's okay. Yeah, but it's interesting because it seems like at least the way we're starting to think about it now in terms of our own sort of interaction with the book is that, yes, there is something meaningful about our sort of interaction with it. And you know, there's the point I think I'm trying to arrive at is like the idea of like, how can some sort of cultural object, be it a book or a record, in some way register or capture what might be the consciousness or soul of a person, right? And like, you know, the protagonist, when he first finds out everything about the machine, his immediate response is like, Morel was wrong. Like he fooled himself into believing that the machine itself captured like the spirits or the souls of the people. And then by the end of the book, he's changed his I think, I might be wrong, but I feel like he has changed, like he's come around, and now he believes, along with Morel, that that is what the machine does and preserves, right? So then he makes the decision to sort of inscribe himself into this thing by recording himself, or superimposing his own life into the recording that was made. So I don't know. I guess I'm wondering, because we all started out by saying like, no, this seems like a hellish thing. But then on the other hand, when we're reflecting upon it in different ways, we're saying, okay, it makes a little bit of sense, like that there's something meaningful about like the interaction he has or chooses to have with the recording.
And I think it's very much like writing. Writing very much is a choice to inscribe yourself into a record of like consciousness or culture or whatever. And I think what the book really beautifully and spookily thematizes is the risk involved in that. That it's not a neutral, it's not like an action that you can necessarily take lightly. There are dangers and risks involved in putting yourself into that record. Here it's the risk of like death, the kind of removal of your skin that eats you from the outside inwards. I love it so much. Just like this idea of like it almost like strips you, but from the outside in. It's like that idea of photography as a kind of death mask that takes that like layer of your exteriority and preserves it. But because it's so penetrating, it has to like take all the layers of your exteriority, and that just leaves you as kind of like nothing. You're dead, at least.
I have a question based off of this, open to all. Do you feel though that there's, because I do think so. Do you feel that there's a kind of hierarchy, like that he believes one is better than the other, or one is more capable of like preserving or of this idea of immortality, whether it be text or tech? I totally have my own opinion, which is why I'm asking, but I'm wondering if anyone else has one.
That's interesting. I think it has to do with, my first instinct is to say that it has to do with like intention, and so that he problematizes it so there's not a straightforward answer. But if it's, if you're talking about the manipulation of other people's souls or semblances, that's one thing. If you're talking about willing yourself into this hellish delusion of pantomiming a relationship with a woman forever in your ghost self, like that's another type of intention for that. But then there's also the diary that he's writing himself, which we seem to like identify as being a different way of inscribing his lifeness, his vitality, and that in some ways somehow more generative and less sterile, or I'm rambling now, but I think it is something about the written text itself. And I'm curious, did we ever find out who the person is who puts the footnotes in it? These are just
the editor? No.
Unreliable editor.
Yeah.
So that, yeah.
I was just gonna add, like, because I feel like how we're talking about a hierarchy, I think that there is a hierarchy towards text, right? Because at the end of the day, like, it's not like the editor's editing anything he's saying. He's just adding. Whereas with the whole recording thing that was going on, I feel like to me, what I was thinking about was rewriting with the re in parentheses, right? Because rewriting how we can do things, like y'all were talking about pantomiming and stuff. But I'm thinking like how he's rewriting that whole choreography and story, and how he's inflecting it to his views and his like understandings of what he wants out of it. So he wants like a meaningful, like intimate relationship with Bastille. At the end of the day, all he's doing is trying to simulate something that's like fake. It's never gonna be there. But I think that's why I see the text as more as outliving in in immortality rather than the recording thing.
I wonder if there's a hierarchy, but only a provisional hierarchy that's because we're comfortable with text as opposed to this new technology. Because I immediately thought about the Phaedrus and this like story that Plato tells about the invention of writing, and how it kind of is also, it's this good, you can record, you don't have to remember, but it has this dangerous side to it, that it eats away your memory because you no longer have to remember. And so it felt to me a little similar in that like this new invention introduces to our life world a new way of recording, in the way that maybe like lithography or photography or the printing press also introduced a new way of recording to our life. And so we kind of have to come to terms with it when we are confronted by it. And that's kind of to my answer at the very beginning about immortality. I think that we're confronted with the question, but sometimes we don't have the agency to give an answer, because immortality is like outside the bounds of human action, but it's not like outside of humanness. Like we participate in it anyway.
I think what I'm thinking of is like, I think when he looks at the machine, he really focuses on its materiality, on the fact that it like is an object, and somehow he doesn't think of the text in that way. So there's like a part on page 80 where he writes, or it says, if one day the images should fail, it would be wrong to suppose that I have destroyed them. On the contrary, my aim is to save them by writing this diary. Like somehow he thinks that his book, his diary, will outlive this machine. And I think because it's like, it's able to fail, like the machine itself is able to fail. It's this material object, but like a diary can get ruined. You live on an island, it could go into the water. Why does he presume that this is like a better system of preservation, if not that he doesn't really look at it as like a material object so much?
And of course it isn't necessarily either.
Yeah.
Just for like our students read PDFs of it, right? So it's not even there's sort of a phantom of a book that they're interacting. Yeah. Sorry.
No, I totally agree. Do you want to go, Marco?
No. I was just, great point.
Okay. Did we want to try and answer the one question I had posed about what you thought was going to happen, like as you were reading it for the first time? Or Matt?
I was going to jump in the conversation.
Yeah,
when you're bringing us there. Just because, I don't know if it's okay.
Yeah, of course.
I don't know. I there's different elements of what we were talking about, I guess, around the question of like, is there a hierarchy, and just also potentially whatever sort of like ethical dilemma or question might be involved in choosing one form of immortality over the other, especially when we're thinking about like the way he is trying to have, at least in his own eyes, a meaningful relationship with Faustine without her consent or knowledge of him doing that in any way. So he's imposing himself in her life in like this strange way that doesn't affect her, but that also seems to be a strange sort of violation anyways. There's two moments I kind of want to look at and read really quickly. I don't know if I have a point behind this, but it is just it's the first one is Morel talking about the machine and what it does, or how it makes one immortal or eternal. So that's on page 76, and I think I'm pretty sure this is Morel, where he's talking about I have taken some precautions, physical and moral ones, for its defense. I think he's talking about the machine or the island. I believe they will protect it adequately. Even if we left tomorrow, we will be here eternally, repeating consecutively the moments of this week, powerless to escape from the consciousness we had in each one of them, the thoughts and feelings that the machine captured. We will be able to live a life that is always new, because each moment of the projection, because in each moment of the projection, we shall have no memories other than those we had in the corresponding moment of the eternal record. And because the future left behind many times will maintain its attributes forever. So there's something really strange and paradoxical about that notion of like having a future that is always new, but through this constant repetition that goes on eternally. But that, you know, relies on, I guess, that sort of form of amnesia you were talking about, Marcos, I think, that like, you know, with each repetition they forget, you know, and are sort of like living the moment again. But then the other moment I wanted to look at was on page between 82 and 83. And I think this is the protagonist. And I don't remember the context around this, but I found this really a really interesting description where he says, when minds of greater refinement than Morel's begin to work on the invention, man will select a lonely, pleasant place, will go there with the persons he loves most, and will endure in an intimate paradise a single garden, if the scenes to be eternalized are recorded at different moments, will contain innumerable paradises, and each group of inhabitants, unaware of the others, will move about simultaneously almost in the same places without colliding. But unfortunately, these will be vulnerable paradises because the images will not be able to see men. And if they do not heed the advice of Malthus, someday they will need the land of even the smallest paradise and will destroy its defenseless inhabitants, or will exile them by disconnecting their machines. Yeah, so something about that description of like this singular paradise that is at the same time infinite paradise because they're all like superimposed on one another. It seems to be related to potentially that whatever it is he's doing and trying to insert his own sort of narrative in Faustine's life. But then also that question, or, you know, maybe what we were talking about of him, you know, viewing his own journal as something that is going to preserve the machine in a way, because it could potentially still be destroyed. And he's almost talking about it in terms of like this, I don't know if it's right, these are the right terms, but like almost like an environmental, ecological, like human population, you know, scenario in which, you know, there's just no more space or something, and they need, you know, whatever humans are living decide to destroy the machine for themselves. Yeah, I guess I'm just throwing that out there. I'm not sure if I have a main point to derive from that, but thought it was interesting.
You first.
Wait, me?
Yeah.
I was just gonna go back to your question.
Okay.
No, yeah, because so you're asking what we thought about, like what we thought was gonna happen.
Yeah.
Or whatever. Yeah. So basically, maybe because I don't know how to read, I literally read it as the invention of like Morel, like the invention of moral. So I was like, oh, like we're gonna learn something at the end or some shit, right? and then as like the part where I was just kind of like, where he thinks he's the ghost and had died already or something, and was like, oh, I probably died there. I was like, so how's he building moral by telling us he's dead or something like that, you know? And then right when Morel actually starts talking about invention and like the thing, and scares everyone at the party, I was just kind of like, oh, the invention of Morel. And then that's when I was like, okay, this makes sense now. Like, well, it was making sense. Like, I was like, oh, it's a good story, but I don't get how we're learning about more. Like, I guess the moral and the morality or whatever. But that's what I thought was gonna happen. I thought we were gonna learn something. But I mean, we did learn something, a few things actually. But that's where I needed to learn how to read.
I think that's great. It's a great cautionary tale in close reading. Max, or I just want to say, way back to what Matt was saying, I just want to say, I had actually highlighted that passage and literally just put a question mark, because I was like, I don't know even what he's talking about. Like, the future left behind many times will maintain its attributes forever. Or I guess the future, maybe the idea of the future will always be the same, like the same possible future. But I didn't understand. Or when he says his precautions, the moral ones, what are his moral precautions? Like, I feel like that never felt clarified to me, what moral precautions he took in defense. And it seems important, but I don't have a clue. I also just have like little problems here and there with the machine and how it functions, and how I think that there are like holes to poke in how it actually works.
I think it's been helpful for me to think of it in terms of like Westworld, if you guys have seen either the movie or the TV show, the HBO show, but the idea of they're like theme parks, people buy robots that are just like super realistic and are all on a loop. So they're doing different narratives and they're all programmed to have lives and memories. And you can visit the park, and unless you stay for longer than the usual stay of like 7 days, you don't see the loop and the repetition of their words. And it seems so obviously to steal from this book. But that's been helpful to me in terms of, because what I stick on is like the idea of the projections and then the thinking of the materiality of these images, because it does seem unclear if they can be smelled, and they say you could like touch the invisible hair of like a woman or something like that, right? But it's the sensation of touch, right, as opposed to touch. So it's been somehow more helpful for me to think of like a physical machine, like a robot, as sort of what he's anticipating in terms of like more perfect inventions that are capable of more and more convincing semblances of living humans. But I don't know, maybe I was just leaning into the sci-fi thing.
Christian, did you want to say something, or were you?
Yeah, I was gonna say, what Max was saying, like to me, like thinking about time, because I know at the end we're told that like as he's writing the diary and like recording himself, like this one is he's dying, I guess, and it seems like in a pretty quick span of time. But when we're learning about the recording of the rest of the scenes going on the island, I'm thinking about how time is distorted and how, to me, it sounds like they got a longer time to live without being known they were being recorded. I don't know if that makes sense. So I guess the question of time and distortion.
Well, I mean, he does get to live out the like 7 days that he plays out his second choreography, and then starts to, and he does little like tests with animals and what is it, or fruit? What does he do tests with?
Vegetable stuff. Yeah.
We're hitting the 30 minutes though, so I just want to make sure if anybody has like burning comments to make. Matt.
I just wanted to jump in there just because just thinking about like the performance he puts on in those 7 days, right? Like he's trying to preserve himself, at least maybe in some way, like his own life, and get to relive it for eternity and have it be this like the his own eternal paradise living on earth, right? But at the same time, like whatever that performance was, what I know about that character, like I can't imagine that's who he actually really genuinely is. Like he's interacting with these recordings beforehand, and he's projecting all of this stuff onto these people and interpreting what they're doing in relation to him. And it's like full of like paranoia and like insecurity and all of this stuff, right? And yeah, it's just so strange, that idea that like once he's grasped what he could do with this, he decides to you know, I guess in some way record himself potentially for the future for others to interact with and meet and maybe learn or know something about him. But it's totally, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but like it's like a false image of him, right? And yeah, well,
It's an invention.
It's
He's inventing himself.
Yeah.
And he projects into that invention of himself. I think that's where the kind of like dangerous hope of eternity comes, not from the actual eternity that he lives out on the island per se, but his imagination and projection into the potential eternity he has on this island. I think also just my last comment will be, there's this idea that I'm taking from someone else, but it's about the like division between immortality and eternity. That like immortality is a human thing. It's like our preservation of ourselves and our stories and our lives beyond the kind of like preset limits of birth and death. But eternity is like a different idea of like this kind of cycle that has no beginning and no end and will kind of continue forever. So like paradise and hell have this idea of eternity after Judgment Day. And it's kind of, this feels to me like kind of like a mixture between the two, because there's this desire to preserve oneself, but it's a preservation that has no end to it. It like kind of like just goes on forever, which brings up a whole set of problems with it.
As my last comment, I want to go back to something we said way at the beginning, which is why, if we all are so like, we don't want to live forever, he was so like ready to do it. And I'm thinking about, on Tuesday, Max had sent me these different versions, like these different adaptations of The Invention of Morel. And I think I maybe had said to a few of you that the Italian version to me was so jarring because no one speaks for half an hour. It's just the wind for 33 minutes of the film before someone speaks. And I think what that adaptation really pinpointed for me was how lonely he was and how isolated he felt. And that's something that I don't think we fully get from the text, because he's constantly talking. Like, we're reading what he's writing and it feels like we're just constantly filled with his voice and his thoughts. But for him, it was such an isolating and lonely experience. So I think he's in it's like a completely different like condition for him to make that decision under, whether or not he would be willing to risk that.
Lonely and like cut off from any future in the world as a fugitive too, right? So there's like this idea that it's not like he's just like waiting for a plane to save him like we might expect from other island sort of adventure stories. Like, this is it, or this is as good as it gets for him, is this place until he dies. And so in a way, I guess it's him like making lemonade from lemons and getting an eternity out of it. But even he, in the last pages, like goes back and forth between describing what will happen to him as like a hell and as a heaven at the same time. So yeah, I don't have a final thought. I guess that was my final
thought. Okay, I think, unless Christian, you want to say something? Okay. Thank you so much, you guys, for participating in our first and last book chat. Yeah. And yeah, I think I'll just end the recording here. Bye, guys. See you in class.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. See ya.
Yeah,